When it comes to trivializing Rogue Trader, the key archetype that does this, and probably the most important one to have in your retinue, is an officer. It is the premier support archetype. But how does it do it? Well, there are two core features when it comes to an officer. The first one being your level 1 ability, Voice of Command. What this does is the officer gives bonuses, buffs to their allies to all stats based on 10 plus the officer's fellowship bonus for one round. There are many talents and abilities that can enhance this further, but this will be your linchpin for what makes combat very easy, because in Rogue Trader, the AI has no way to respond to heavy amounts of allied buffs. The second feature comes in at level 3, which is the Officer's Bring It Down ability. The officer immediately grants an ally an extra turn with 2 AP and no MP. If the ally is under the effect of Voice of Command and kills an enemy before the end of the officer's turn, that ally gains a 1-time additional 2 times the officer's fell bonus momentum. This can allow for very easy access to heroic abilities, but more importantly, the more turns you have, the more killing power your team has, and the more options that you have for winning the encounter. With additional buffs and taking additional turns, you're going to find it quite easy to take down the enemy, and Bring It Down, if you get those kills, can make it very easy to set up Finest Hour, which is the officer's heroic ability that comes in at level 4. What Finest Hour does is the officer grants an ally an extra turn with full AP and MP during the extra turn. It states that there is no attack limit, but this is actually, it gives you 12 attack actions. This is exceptionally powerful, and it can allow your team to just instantly one-turn every encounter from Act 2 of the right setup, items, and other consumables. Being an archetype that only really needs to pump fellowship, you have a lot of opportunities and a lot of options when building your officers. The typical supporting role that you'll normally go with is a ballistic skill fellowship officer that can either use agility if it wants to skip ahead, or if you're going down the cycle route, you can build into some buffs there. And if you're not, then like I said, agility or perception is going to be quite useful for those ranged attacks. It really depends on your origin. But many of your abilities will further enhance what you can do here. Things like the talent Focus will allow you to stack perception and ballistic skill to allies, which can really help prevent enemy dodges and also increase your party's likeliness of getting those critical hits, because excess ballistic skill becomes critical chance. Be Vigilant will do something similar, where it will increase your allies' weapon skill, and it will also give them more damage on attacks of opportunity. However, this won't stack with itself. Whilst buffing your stats is very useful and very beneficial to the party, the most AP efficient talent that you can take on your officer is Decisive Response. What this does is it will allow your first use of Voice of Command and Bring It Down to cost 1 AP less. This essentially makes Voice of Command cost 0 AP on turn 1 and Bring It Down costs only 1 AP. So for 1 AP you can get a buff out to an ally and an extra turn. This leaves you open to apply other buffing abilities before you get access to more AP in later levels. Other really important talents that you can pick up on Officer is something like Lasting Impression. Half the bonuses granted by Voice of Command remain until the end of combat. This bonus does not stack with itself or with bonuses granted by Voice Command, but does count as an officer ability effect for the purpose of other talents. This will be like removing line of sight requirements with stuff like Bring It Down after you've used Move an ally to get them up into combat. This is going to be one of the go-to talents. The ones that I always like to get first are Lasting Impression, Decisive Response, and Be Vigilant. Whilst, like I said, the weapon skill version can sometimes have its uses, it doesn't quite have the same impact, and a lot more of your allies are going to need the perception more than they're going to need the weapon skill. Depending on your setup, you might go for something like Leader's Assault, which can increase your fellowship every time you attack, or you might even take something like No Respite if you're going for a lot of extra turns that you'll be giving to allies, or even if you're going Grand Strategist, something like Seize the Initiative will be a very good damage buff. Though for myself, I like to go Air of Authority on the abilities, which makes talents like Steel Resolve very efficient, whereas some other people do like Commanding Voice, which increases the distance of your Voice of Command. I find that because combat doesn't often go past the first round, I don't get as much mileage out of this. When it comes to available abilities, if you're not building for, say, Psycho abilities from your origin, there are some very good ones. One of my favourites is Air of Authority. The officer increases the ally's resolve by 2 plus the officer's resolve divided by 3 until the end of combat. This is why something like Steel Resolve is quite useful. If the target's under the effect of Voice Command, they will start their next turn with 1 additional action point. This is going to be their main turn, not an additional bonus turn. Something like move is a bit situational, though I find it very useful for trying to get allies into combat, especially if you're trying to give extra turns to melee allies. The officer immediately grants an ally additional MP equals to their fellowship bonus. The target can only use movement abilities, heroic attacks, or death messages during this extra turn. If the target's under the effect of voice of command, it ignores attacks opportunity until the end of the officer's turn. So basically, you can put voice of command on someone, air of authority, move to get them right into the thick of things, and then you can give them an extra turn. Though if you are later in the game building Break Their Ranks, this is also quite useful with that for those melee allies. What Break Their Ranks does is this ability can only target allies who have enemies adjacent to them. Until the start of the officer's next turn, all melee attacks by the target deal an additional damage equal to the officer's fellowship bonus divided by 2 multiplied by the number of enemies adjacent to the target when this ability is used. If the target's under the effect of voice of command, they immediately make an attack of opportunity against an adjacent enemy, targeting the one with the lowest remaining wounds. So it's a good way to take something out. One of the less important ones is something like get back in the fight. The officer encourages an ally who immediately recovers from burning, bleeding, toxing, or stunned effects. If the target's under the effect of voice of command, they also gain 2 times the officer's willpower bonus temporary wounds. Now this would be something that'd be a lot more effective if you could hold actions. The fact that you can't hold actions means that with the current system of Rogue Trader's arm system, this is not a very dependable ability, because chances are, of the way armor works, swarms of enemies will either do no damage or they'll kill you before it comes back around to the officer before you can even make use of this. Take aim something a lot more useful for higher difficulties, but it's not really that useful and unfair. The target's next attack will ignore cover and will have double the effective distance. If the target's under the effect of voice command, the attack will ignore enemy block and dodge. Additionally, the damage from the attack cannot be reduced below 30 plus 3 times fellowship bonus for any reason. So it's very good for getting through enemy armor, but like I said, it's not very useful and unfair because there's just not enough enemies that need to take something like this, though it is more useful if you're doing a max slider run. Personally, I'd prefer if it wasn't just one attack, but I can understand why it is. There are 4 options for upgrading your Finest Hour. The most important one being Finest Hour Upgrade 4, which is the target Finest Hour gains bonuses. During the extra turn, all their non-attacking abilities cost -1 AP. This is exceptionally important to be able to get through all of your archetypes buffs and their self-use abilities before they make those attacks, so that way they can turn all that AP into extra attacks. The second one is Finest Hour Upgrade 1. The target Finest Hour gains additional bonuses. During their extra turn, the target deals 3 times the officer's fellowship bonus extra damage. Until the end of combat, the target gains the effects of voice of command. This will stack with lasting impression, so you can get a lot of extra bonuses, though Finest Hour Upgrade 1, which is the one I just described, could always be traded by Finest Hour Upgrade that can prevent death. The reason that you would normally go for this, which is Finest Hour Upgrade 2, target Finest Hour gains more bonuses. All negative effects are immediately removed from the target. Until the officer's next turn, the target cannot die. Its wounds cannot be reduced below 1. This is literally the only way to stop Idra from exploding and dying, summoning demons from using her powers. So chances are you're either going to take Upgrade 4 and Upgrade 1, or Upgrade 4 and Upgrade 2. When you're building your party, you should always be thinking about how Officer works into it, and you should build the party around the Officer. After all, the support archetype is going to be what determines on how difficult the encounter is going to be. Normally, you'll pick the ally that you're going to be wanting to do the damage, and depending on your team composition, you'll normally put something like Voice of Command down. If you have something like Move, you'll use that to get your melee allies up, and then you'll bring it down to whomever you're going to start leading the combat. If it's going to be a buffer companion, you'll use them to set up further buffs, like say if you're using a Cyber Raven Psyker, or if you were looking to get off some easy kills to be able to build some momentum to try and get a heroic act, you'd probably give it to one of those. Depending on how clumped the enemies are, depends if you would go for a melee that you need to set up to do some tanking, or a ranged companion if you want to just blast down enemies. When it comes to Cassia, one of the big advantages Cassia has is the fact that Cassia can take decisive response. The fact that Jay's locked out of this is why Jay is a less useful officer and isn't really online until level 36. Decisive response and lasting impression, like I said, are my 2 highest priorities, and the rest comes down more to what your party's using. Normally, like I said, I will go for something like focus, and then I'll prioritize, say, other talents like Leader's Assault or Seize the Initiative in exemplar levels, depending on what type of party I'm using. Grand Strategist is normally a very good upgrade because it allows you to go first and you want your buffer to go before your damage companions, though once you have access to Commander's Chrono in Act 4, it does make, say, Vanguard or even Master Tactician more viable, though there are very few circumstances where I'd ever build a Vanguard officer, and I'd probably either go Master Tactician or I would go for the Grand Strategist. Now, before I give some of my Origin recommendations, if you are finding videos like this useful, do make sure you leave a like and comment below on what you'd like to see next. But with just a quick run through, some of the really good ones for this are going to be Astra Militarum Commander, which in the 1.5 rework got changed from a perception-based character to a fellowship-based character. This can give big party-wide buffs and increase rate of fire, so it is incredibly strong. Another really good one is going to be Commissar. Commissar builds extra bonuses to its own damage from fellowship and ballistic skill, and it can also give coercion to give really effective buffs and damage increases to allies, so it's a very effective officer choice. Less obvious than the other two is actually Minister and Priest. Because they get really big bonuses to their willpower, you can use Get Back in the Fight with them, and their War Hymn with Litany of Hatred just does a party-wide buff for one turn. Though less powerful than the other two in my overall estimates, this will actually stack with other priests in the party like Argenta, so if you're planning to go that route, you will get a really effective one-turn push. Probably one of the two worst ones is going to be Noble, because essentially all you serve me is really doing is giving you a +5 bonuses to hit, and it is in dire need of an update. And the other contender for the worst one is going to be the Castigator Arbitrator. The Castigator Arbitrator, it just feels very weak by comparison, and its death sentence ability is not the best by comparison. Though if you want to read any of these abilities to know more of what I've been discussing, there are going to be links to the wiki below and my own spreadsheet that fully lists every talent and ability in the game, so do have a look at those and you can get more of an opinion yourself. But that's going to be sort of the guide to what the officer does. Like I said, the rotations you're going to want to be looking at is getting that voice of command out, getting that air of authority out, moving allies up and then bring it down, and then popping a finest out to stack those extra turns when you can. Officer is a very straightforward archetype, and it isn't until you get to your tier 2s that it gets a little bit more complicated, but this will greatly power up your party, and like I said, the AI really can't counter buffs and extra turns, so it's the easiest way to complete the strategy and to beat Rogue Trader. Useful Homeworlds when it comes to this. If you're going for something like a combat class, Fortress World is always going to be useful, though less useful here unless you're trying to make a lot of extracts or using another officer for extra turns. Forge World, you can get your defenses up a little bit, but it's not really going to be my go-to one. Imperial World can give you some generic buffs, and it can help boost with some extra resolve stacking, though my favorite one is actually going to be Hive World, mostly because weapon personalization applies to more than what people realize. If you have a physical weapon in one hand, it will apply to your offhand. I find this very useful if you're going to make a Commissar Master Tactician, one of my favorite setups, and the other talents will come in quite useful. But if you want to see more about what they do and how strength numbers works, do have a look at, like I said, those links in the spreadsheet, and look at those links to the wiki. If you want to see some complete builds that show you every talent to pick, then have a look at the spreadsheet linked below and you'll see some of my builds. To give an example of what a complete build could look like for when you're going for your officer, here's one that I did from one of my previous live streams, which unfortunately the Grimdark run ended to space combat. However, what I have done is I've built up coercion because my origin is going to be a Commissar, so we get a lot of benefits, but I won't spend too much time on that because that's something that I've previously covered in the Commissar video. One of the first ones I get in is, like I said, lasting impression, because you want that voice of command to be as active for as long as possible. In the early acts, having this on across multiple turns just really helps keep the party alive and going. So I can be involved in combat. I pick up ballistic skill first. I take one of my origin talents as one of my first common talents. The common talents are the ones you can only take common talents. This is to start progressing some of the abilities there. But then I get decisive response. This is going to make my ability to be able to be engaged in combat as well as buffing a lot more viable. And for when I get into my tier 2, I'll have a lot more AP for more buffs. The first one I take is move, 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 because I like to be able to get my allies into the right position, and I'll be able to show this off in footage of why that's so important. Weapon personalization, again, this is coming from the Homeworld. This will apply to both my offhand sword and my main hand gun, and if I have a physical gun, it will apply to an offhand las gun. Focus is going to be one that you can swap around, but like I said, it's going to be very important to go with this one first if you want to be helping allies with their perception or ranged allies with their ballistic skill. I take Finest Hour upgrade 4 first because obviously again that -1 AP is going to be important to all builds. It doesn't matter what type of party you're running. I'm building Law Imperium. That's because I'm going to be using the trick in Act 2 to turn Law Imperium to scale off Fellowship. You could also do Persuasion, but with Coercion I wouldn't recommend that because they're skills that you need one or the other, not really both. You could also go for Commerce here. Start building up Fellowship as well as building up Steel Resolve, so this is together they're both going to be a +4 here, so that's like the equivalent of +30 Fellowship coming into your Resolve. Air of Authority, it's going to be getting boosted up by the fact that I have that Steel Resolve because my character is going to be having 10 Resolve themselves. We take in Characteristic Chaining Perception here. This is because officers can't naturally progress Perception, and this will help with landing those ranged shots because Commissar is a ranged style companion. Inspiring Speech will help build up momentum. This is incredibly potent and can allow your team to one turn if you start getting kills with Voice of Command that's being applied to allies that you bring it down. And then the last one I take is Let Them Know Fear. This is because, again, this is going to turn some of my Fellowship to more Resolve if I'm near allies or enemies. The last one I go for, because I'm not planning to use it, is Finest Hour upgrade 1. So this is going to be giving me a lot more damage bonuses, and as you can see here, like I said, going into combat, I'm seeing in Act 1 10 Resolve here, so this is going to be pretty big for applying those abilities, and I've taken items for like debuffing so I can be involved with it. But let me show you a little bit some of the rotations that we're using here and how we're going to use the officer in combat. This will be pretty quick because the rotation I'm going to show you is going to be very simple. So I've got myself set up here in the combat. I'm going to add Voice of Command to Kibella. I'm then going to add Air of Authority, which is going to give us a big little momentum boost. And because Kibella is a melee companion, I'm going to use Move, Move, Move to get her into the right position to be able to then jump these enemies here. There are other buffs I could apply, but I'm probably really not going to need to. So as I then give her Bring It Down, it's going to give her the position to be able to jump in. And because of those buffs, you notice that, yeah, that did a lot of damage, and it's also given me the Heroic Act from the momentum boost, which is essentially going to allow me to now one turn the combat, and this is on unfair difficulty. So because of how OP Blade Dancer is, which is why it's such a good target for something like an officer, you're going to just see Kibella's just going to clean up combat here, and then I'll be able to slowly move around combat and just finish off absolutely everything. There are people who generally say stuff like Blade Dancers and officers aren't OP when they just enable everything to happen here. Because of the buffs, Kibella's stats are now so high, it's allowing her to one-shot these enemies, because most of the things being channeled here, especially on those jumps, that's just coming in from weapon skill and her agility. Weapon skill is not being as hardly buffed, as hard buffed as it could be, but everything else is. Even her strength being up here is going to obviously be giving her extra damage because she doesn't quite have the gear to channel her agility into it. Though because she has done Death Waltz, we are seeing the agility come to here. And you're seeing her do 76 damage here in Act 1. There are people that in mid-Act 2, when they first get access to Sniper Urilit, who are genuinely impressed by the fact that she can do 70 damage in a single shot. But you're not going to see an operative do something like what is happening here, and how easily you just one-turn combat when I hadn't had any of my other allies engage in it. That's all I've got for time for you in this one. We'll be looking to do some really big build updates with DLC 3, which is probably less than 2 months away at this point. That's all I've got for today. I've been Rem619. I'll see you in the next video.